Canadian officials are launching an investigation into the loss of that OceanGate sub. A team of investigators are now travelling to St John's, Newfoundland, to gather information.
Yeah, the US Coast Guard have said debris was consistent with a catastrophic loss of the pressure chamber and that the bodies may never be recovered.
Indeed. Would you go on a daring underwater expedition to view the Titanic? We talked earlier, didn't we, about it's the lure of that amazing ship and the hold it seems to still have on our psyche. Well, somebody who knows all about that is historian Gareth Russell. He declined to go on a trip with OceanGate in 2021, even though he's a Titanic expert. Should we talk to him now? Very good morning to you. Can you?
Morning, how are you?
Well, I'm fine. It's very sad when we think of what happened to the crew of the Titan. But I guess we can all understand their fascination with the Titanic. Can you explain why we are still so mesmerised by what happened to that ship?
I suppose yes, absolutely. It is an incredible story. Sometimes people ask why it is more famous than other shipwrecks, even of the same time, thinking of the Lusitania that was torpedoed by the Germans in 1915. I think part of it is the Titanic took 2 hours and 40 minutes to sink. And so people on board had time to figure out they were in trouble, to react in certain ways, and it becomes a kind of morality play on how you would respond to impending death. And also, of course, the hubris of it being the greatest technological achievement of its era and still being destroyed by nature. And it's interesting, as you say, that kind of fascination that brought the people on the Titan into the ocean, because I think there is an element of which it's almost, for some people, not a pilgrimage, but there's a cachet in saying you saw it. So it has become such a fixture in pop culture because of movies and things like that, that I think some people have an added fascination in wanting to say that they physically saw it through the porthole of the submarine.
Well, you did, didn't you? You wanted to go and see it.
I was offered. I didn't want to. I didn't. To be clear, I didn't get far enough into really investigating the submarine. It's now become clear that another of my colleagues did and had serious safety concerns about it, as we're hearing from quite a few people. It was very early on in production meetings, and I sort of caught from just the tone that I said, sorry, can I just check, do you expect me to get in the submarine? Is that what we're discussing? And I said no, simply because I don't think it would be a particularly pleasant journey. I don't think it's a wise journey. And also, I don't love enclosed spaces. It is a very small space for quite a length of time. And also, without sounding too reductive, it's a pretty small window. It's very limited visibility. And I thought, I'm actually not sure that I will see anything really through this window that I wouldn't see perhaps in better definition on the cameras sent back up to the footage sent back up to the surface.
And Gareth, serious questions are now being asked about the suitability of the craft, its seaworthiness, full stop, seem to be corners curt in its manufacture. Do you think these kind of expeditions should carry on, or should we pause and have a proper safety overview so we avoid any further disasters in the future?
Great question. I mean, we've just found out this morning that OceanGate have closed their doors. The business that ran this, and there's speculation in the US press that they have done this to avoid what will presumably be an avalanche of litigation. I don't think that's speaking out of turn there. I think there's going to be some serious questions, and that those questions will take on a legal hue. I personally am not convinced that there is any more archaeological, for want of a better word, justification for these trips. I should say one of the gentlemen who died in the Titan, Paul Henri Nochelet, is contributed hugely to the development of submarines and deep sea dives. And actually, not a lot of people know this. The Titanic was discovered in a Cold War mission. It was the sort of a perfect cover story. The US Navy, were looking for 2 missing nuclear submarines. And that was part of how it was discovered. So those Titanic dives have really contributed over the years to our knowledge of how to dive to the deep. And it's also contributed to the field of microbiology as well. But my argument would be it's done that. It has served its purpose. And certainly if you look at the OceanGate submarine, it wasn't exactly at the forefront of nautical technology, to put it mildly. So I do think the wisest thing to do by a long shot is to stop these, at least for a while. And certainly I personally don't think there should ever really have been commercialized dives to it. I think it mixes profit with safety in a way that quite clearly corners were cut. It's not in anyone's best interests, I think.
And there are some columnists in today's newspapers reflecting on that, saying, I think somewhere along the line we've forgotten that this is a mass grave. Human beings died on that ship, and maybe it should be treated with more respect.
Yeah, and that's a great point, because I sort of go back and forth on this, because I think, well, hundreds of people go to the Tower of London every day, and they go to Gettysburg, and they tour the former trenches on the Western Front. Many historical sites are, by their nature, graveyards. So I think visiting it is one thing. I think where other people have concerns that is justified is that there's no regulation on what these submarines can or can't do when they get down to the wreck of the Titanic. It's not owned by anyone. It's in international waters. And so I think there are serious concerns that these dives are sort of in a no man's land and can do what they like. And that is really inappropriate. And no major historical site would be treated like that if it was on land.
So, Gareth, that update you just gave us, that the company has gone into receivership or liquidation, presumably.
Yeah.
They're doing that so they have no assets, so there's nothing to be able to sue. Their insurance presumably will be invalidated at that moment. That's going to be another grave insult to those who've perished. Yeah,
it is. It's stand by your mess, to put it sort of colloquially, I suppose. But you were warned. That it's now become very clear. They were told time and time again. I mean, Anne, you mentioned that I had this discussion in 2021, and it was a colleague who brought up safety concerns, and that was 2 years ago. And it's since emerged that there have been several people who pulled out of the dives because they saw language in the waivers that made them uncomfortable, that was unusual. They saw things about the construction of the Titan that were questionable. It also, I mean, it's even the name of the Titan, I remember thinking, was a bit strange. There was sort of in Titanic lore, about 14 years before the Titanic sank, a sci-fi novelist called Morgan Robertson, I think, wrote a book about a luxury liner called the Titan that hit an iceberg and sank. Yeah. And people have sort of said, did he foresee the future or something? But I thought, that's a pretty famous link to something not going well in the Atlantic. So there have been many questions, both serious and slightly more superstitious, I suppose, that OceanGate just have not listened to. And it looks feeble and morally bankrupt to sort of step away from this, when they should be, as you say, at the very least taking some form of culpability after, even if they weren't necessarily prepared to do so before.
Yeah, of course, they lost their much-loved CEO. We should remember he gave his life, I suppose, in one way. But you're speaking to us from Belfast, which, of course, is the home of the fantastic Titanic experience.
It is, and the Titanic's allure will continue. Of course it will. But I think what this might remind us is, for all the fascination it has, it's become such a fixture in popular culture that it's seen as fascinating and slightly benign. I think we need to remember it itself, the physical Titanic, is fascinating but deadly. It is an extremely dangerous place to go to, and even when you get there are so many things still on the Titanic. It was a 46,000-ton ocean liner. There are many things that could fall, that have fallen in the years since it was discovered, and trap or damage a submarine that even gets there. So I think we need to see the Titanic as, yes, very interesting, but also not something that should be trifled with lightly.
Absolutely. Great to talk to you. Wonderful to talk to you about that. Thank you very much indeed.